To say that the Golden State Warriors season was a disappointment, in my opinion, would be an understatement. Steve Kerr came into this year talking about championships. The team is barely not even 2 years removed from their last title. And they're now, for the third time in 5 years, missing the playoffs. This, despite the fact that the roster is the second most expensive in the NBA, I believe, just behind the Phoenix Suns. Don't quote me on that fact, but I'm pretty certain that's true. Regardless, they spend a lot of money, and the results do not justify the means. What went wrong? If you tune into this show, I've told you from the start. Unfortunately, it took a bad season for head coach Steve Kerr to realize what many of us knew all along. We're going to talk about what to expect this offseason. It was also exit interview days for the Golden State Warriors, meaning a lot of players, a lot of coaches, executives faced the media, answered questions. So I'm going to play a bunch of sound. This is going to be a two-parter, folks. I highly doubt I could fit everything in one show. So sit back, relax. You're going to hear from a lot of individuals. You're going to, of course, hear from me. I'm going to give you some updates as they currently stand regarding the future of certain players who may or may not be back. It's going to be an interesting offseason, one of the most interesting in Golden State Warriors history. Can they still be contenders? Is the dynasty truly over? Is it time for a rebuild? Maybe just a revamp? We'll break it all down next. This is Locked On Warriors.
You are Locked On Warriors, your daily Golden State Warriors podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Warriors your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And speaking of Locked On Warriors and the Locked On Podcast Network, I want to start the show real fast by letting folks know that if you're interested in sponsoring this program, you hear us talk about various clients that we are proud to give love to as advertisers, as sponsors of this show across the entire network. But individual organizations have the opportunity to sponsor us locally. And by locally, I don't mean literally in the Bay Area, but I do mean in terms of just sponsoring this specific program. And if you're interested in doing so, email, if you're watching this on YouTube, it's right there, warriors24pod@gmail.com. Again, warriors24pod@gmail.com. We'd be thrilled to work with you. We could even do shows at your location. Picture that. Locked On Warriors coming to you live from blank. Despite my social anxieties, I'll leave the house. I'll come to your establishment. The bottom line is this program, thankfully, and I'm forever appreciative for the audience. Thank you for your support. We've built up some success here. And why not be a part of it? So again, email us if you're interested in being a sponsor of this program. It's a tremendous rate. And just reach out to us and we'll get right back to you. Warriors24pod@gmail.com. You can follow me on Threads @DogWild. The program is also there as well at Locked On Warriors. Thank you again for making Locked On Warriors your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts. And again, of course, on YouTube. This program today is not live. In case you're watching this thinking it's a live show, it's not. It's an instant premiere, and both segments will be. The main reason for that is there are so many elements I'm integrating into today's show that I need to be focused on making sure everything is played correctly. So I apologize for not going live with the audience today. That's typically what I do. But the chat is open. It's active right now if you're watching this show as part of the instant premiere on YouTube. And we'll be back live very soon. This offseason is going to be filled with a lot of interesting guests. A lot of great topics now that we're not just mostly doing post-game shows. Yes, there will be a show focused strictly to Jonathan Kuminga. Long overdue on that. A biography of sorts on the young budding star. There will be a show dedicated to when Steve Kerr's gut has gone horribly wrong. And there might be one or two instances where it went right. But I mentioned that because One of our guests on this program fairly recently, the Golden State Warriors beat reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle, who I hope to get back on this program very soon. Sam, I think Gordon is his last name. I sincerely apologize. Yeah, Sam Gordon. I got it right. Okay, so Sam's going to be back on the show soon. But in an article Sam wrote about a month or so ago, he got Steve Kerr to admit that Kerr makes the majority of his decisions by relying on his gut, relying on his intuition, and not necessarily on statistics, not necessarily using logic and reasoning, which was eye-opening yet not surprising. And the moment I heard about that, and that episode was a few weeks back, if you want to go into the archives, if you missed that episode with Sam, and Sam's going to be back on the show soon. But yeah, that revelation suddenly made me think about every decision that Steve Kerr, as the head coach, having and wielding all that incredible power, made, not necessarily using what may make sense to most of us who rely proudly on critical thinking for making our decisions. No, he likes to rely on his gut. And more times than not, it has not resulted in successful decisions. People love bringing up those 9 championships for Steve Kerr. But again, for those 5 he won as a player, he was a bench player, not responsible for those titles. Yeah, that'd be like saying Lester Quinones, if the Warriors won a title this year, if he proudly boasted that one ring. It's the equivalent of that. And then as a coach, at least 2 of those 4 championships, anybody would have won a championship with that squad. Those Kevin Durant teams were so damn deep. And talking about Steve Kerr's gut, that second championship almost didn't happen because the Warriors nearly lost that Western Conference Final Series to the Houston Rockets, largely because of Steve Kerr's gut. And I really can't wait to get into that episode because there have been so many instances over the years where I was left scratching my head going, what are you doing? And I'm going to dedicate a whole episode to that. There's going to be a lot of themed episodes pertaining to that. We're obviously going to be covering the team extensively in terms of, free agent potential acquisitions, in terms of potential trades, anything on the transaction waiver wire. Let me take the word waiver out of that. Anything on the transaction wire, we will obviously cover on this program. But today, we're going to play a lot of sound. Exit interviews. What that means is at the end of the season, the vast majority of players, certain coaches, specifically head coaches, certain executives, more specifically GMs, aka general managers, make themselves available to the press to answer questions about the end of the season. Stephen Curry was not available for the end of the season exit interviews. Neither was Draymond Green. Draymond Green and Steph did make themselves available following the Warriors-Kings game, which I'm guessing was the justification for them not being available for the exit interviews. But nearly every other player, Steve Kerr, Mike Dunleavy Jr., were all involved in that. We're going to play some of that sound on this show today, given how fascinating some of those answers were. One of the biggest topics, one of the biggest questions, maybe an issue, if that's the right vernacular, for the Golden State Warriors is what to do with Klay Thompson, who is going to be an unrestricted free agent. Last offseason, the Golden State Warriors reportedly offered Klay a 2-year, $48 million contract extension. Klay said no. That's a lot of money, folks. Okay, $24 million a year. But he said no. He feels like he's worth more, and so he's played this season as a lame duck player, and he is now an unrestricted free agent. Klay has said he wants to come back, but he has also expressed the fact that, this is a business. He's a very prideful individual. And a couple of reports that have come out recently, the first from Sam Amick of The Athletic, is reporting that the Dallas Mavericks are a potential suitor for Klay Thompson if they want to add another shooter around Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. Another suitor is going to be the Orlando Magic. So many of these decisions are going to be based on how this postseason goes. For example, if the Dallas Mavericks make the NBA Finals, chances are they're not going to pursue Klay. Maybe they will, but the odds of a lot of these things are going to change depending on postseason success. Side note, FanDuel, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network, for these next 2 episodes, during our advertiser breaks, I'm going to be mentioning FanDuel. And during those segments, I'm going to give you the lines for each of the opening round series. Some of those lines are tantalizing. I'm going to give you my recommendations for those. So stay tuned for that. I thought of that talking about the Magic and the Mavericks. But regardless, so the Klay Thompson thing is going to be very interesting, and we're going to play some sound from him a little bit. I'm also going to give you some stats about each player when I play a lot of the sound to kind of recap how they did this year. Also worth noting, I'm just finishing up my third year covering the Golden State Warriors for the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the network for putting me in this position, and I hope I'm making you, the audience, first and foremost, obviously everyone involved with the network. Hope you're satisfied with the coverage. I'm doing my best. One thing I take pride in is the fact that, unlike a lot of other individuals who seem to care more about making Steve Kerr and the Warriors happy, my objective is objectivity, to avoid homer content, to give you the truth and not just what the Warriors or certain people are feeding you in terms of sports propaganda. That's the goal here, is the truth. I try to be transparent when possible. I try to be objective and put my fandom aside when possible. And I do think that's at least a part of the reason why the show enjoys relative success. And that's one thing you will always get from me. Again, I love this team, but there is a very clear difference between being a cheerleader and being a fan. All right. I'm not always going to be positive. And Steve Kerr has earned a lot of good grace from the media, largely because of his success, but it also gives him a lot of forgiveness and a lot of head turning when these head scratching decisions are made. No, we will call you out. That is part of the business. If you're going to get into the NBA, especially as a player, as a head coach, as a general manager, you are a public figure. You are an individual in a position of incredible power and privilege. And with that comes blokes like me who call out when you're making dumb decisions, who call out when you're making good decisions, but who's going to call you out. And so that's what this program's all about. And the whole point of that little diatribe was that this is the first time in my 3 years covering this team. We just finished up our third year, or at least I did. And this is the earliest we've ever done this. My first year covering this show, the Golden State Warriors won the championship. And I am very proud to say that from the very beginning of that season, myself and Stephen A. Smith were the only two media members sticking to our guns since August of that season in saying this Warriors team was going to win the title. Predicted that correctly, predicted every round of the playoffs to the exact game correctly until the NBA Finals when I was off by one game. And that was only because Gary Payton II didn't play in the opener, much to my chagrin, because Steve Kerr didn't think he was ready when even his own dad was saying he was ready. I digress. The point is, it's kind of weird that we're starting this as early as we are. I mean, the playoffs haven't even started yet, and yet we're already talking about the Warriors offseason. So we're going to talk more about the Warriors offseason. I just gave you a quick tidbit about Klay Thompson, about where he could end up. We're going to talk about him a little more. We're going to talk about Andrew Wiggins and his future with the Warriors. And we're going to play a lot of sound from Steve Kerr, Mike Dunleavy Jr., Klay, Wiggins, Chris Paul, Kuminga, Moody, Pajemski, Trace Jackson Davis. We're going to talk about Gary Payton II. We're going to talk about where this team stands in terms of their financial structure and where they are in terms of the salary cap. A lot to discuss this offseason and so much more. But first up on the agenda is a very new sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network, and it's a very fun one, and that's Monopoly Go. Love talking about them. People have told me I'm a competitive person. And yeah, I got a competitive side. I like to win. I like to see my Warriors win. And my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly, where you play not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is messing with my friends when I play. I can charge them rent on my iconic properties, just like the classic Monopoly. I can also heist their vaults of riches for myself, and the leaderboards show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But it's just not my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in timed tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game. Join your friends, Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play.
You are Locked On Warriors, your daily Golden State Warriors podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Do you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. Free is a big, important word in this current economic climate we're in. A free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, talking about Klay and the fact that he's going to be a free agent, Bobby Marks of ESPN, their cap expert, dude knows what he's talking about. And I hope you can still hear me as I'm if you're watching the YouTube version of this show right now, I have a graphic on display. If you're listening to the podcast, I will articulate the information that Bobby Marks himself published on one of his social media accounts. The Golden State Warriors for next season, in terms of their offseason outlook, have $174 million already committed to salary. They are already $3 million over the tax threshold. Now, the new collective bargaining agreement that was signed last offseason introduced aprons. These are levels of penalties in terms of going over the cap, and there are repercussions for hitting those aprons. The Warriors this season went over the second apron. The penalty for that was they could not offer a mid-level exception contract. That is going to be one of their goals this offseason, to stay under that apron so they can actually offer someone with talent money beyond the veteran minimum. They got screwed heavily this last offseason for that exact reason, as you saw big after talented player getting signed by other teams for sometimes $500,000 over the vet min, $1 million over the vet min, just to price out a team like the Warriors who couldn't match that. Dario Saric was one of the team's prized free agent acquisitions, which didn't really pan out ultimately due to what we said last offseason. Good signing, except you're not going to get defense from him. And what went even worse is that his three-point shot, which was one of the biggest positives of Saric, besides the fact that, he gives you size, just vanished. So that didn't work out. But again, they really had no options because they could not offer a penny over the veteran minimum because they were over that second apron. And that's part of what makes the whole Klay Thompson situation very curious and very concerning, because if the Warriors bring Klay back, and they could offer him whatever they want because of bird rights, but you offer Klay Thompson big money, you're going over that second apron, you cannot sign anyone to a mid-level exception. Now, what you could do is have a contract set in place verbally and then not have Klay sign on the dotted line until you first sign other players via the mid-level exception, and then you offer Klay his bird rights. I hope I'm correct on that. There's a lot of complexity to the CBA, and if I'm mistaken on that, I will come back in a ensuing episode and correct myself. But I believe the Warriors have that avenue where you can sign someone else to the mid-level exception and then re-sign a player of your own via bird rights. If I'm mistaken on that, again, I will correct myself. I believe that's an option, but if it's not, that's what comes with Klay Thompson. No flexibility for using your mid-level exception. Chris Paul has a $30 million non-guaranteed contract. You're going to hear in some of the sound I'm going to play here in moments that at least Mike Dunleavy Jr. and Steve Kerr verbally are saying they want Chris Paul back. I think that's asinine. Chris Paul did serve one invaluable service to the Golden State Warriors this year, and that was mentorship, coaching, guidance to a lot of the team's young players, much more so than Steve Kerr himself or his staff, which on a whole other level desperately needs a revamp. Kenny Atkinson, I'm sorry, is not up to snuff. Bruce Frazier should not be the number one assistant to Steve Kerr when he is far from qualified for that position. That coaching staff needs help. Steve Kerr needs a legit number one assistant if he's going to be staying on this team to lead them. But regardless, I digress. Chris Paul has a $30 million non-guaranteed contract. I bring that up because that contract is one of the only ways this team is going to be able to truly improve their roster. They're going to have to give him that guaranteed contract and then trade it, hopefully, for someone back that gives you size, that gives you improved perimeter defense, that gives you athleticism. I know Steve Kerr wants more shooting. Maybe you can get all of the above. But Chris Paul is that non-guaranteed contract will become guaranteed. It would shock me if it did not, simply because that is one of the only assets you have to make a trade and improve your team. Klay Thompson, again, unrestricted free agent. Fascinated to see what happens there. Stephen Curry is eligible for a contract extension. Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody are both eligible for contract extensions. We'll save those for another day because there is a possibility that the team will attempt to put off those extensions until next offseason. We'll talk about that on another show. And again, the key free agents for this team, Klay Thompson, Dario Saric, I highly doubt they're going to bring him back. He's just too much of a liability on the defensive side of the ball. If he's okay signing a vet mim to be an end-of-the-bench player, you might see him back. Who knows? Because every indication is the team does like him. And then Gary Payton II has a player option. Remains to be seen if he's going to exercise that. And I believe that player option is somewhere in the $10 to $11 million range. I'm going to look that up real fast as I'm speaking to you on this show. But my understanding is Gary Payton II wants a new contract, and that's going to give him more money stretched out over a longer period. He is due next year, if he signs his player option, $9.13 million. What Gary Payton II likely wants is a new deal, probably 3-4 years. And what I'm guessing he'd be okay with is agreeing to a lower annual salary. And you might see that. You might. But my guess is he's going to opt into that player option and then hope that him and the team negotiate something new. Or he won't opt in, and the team could use their bird rights to sign him to a new deal that, again, comes with a lower annual salary, but maybe more guaranteed money stretched out. That is all a very clear possibility. Gary Payton II has shown that he is not a very durable player, unfortunately. He's also not getting any younger. He's 31 years right now. He will turn 32 next season. So that's what the initial outlook is for the Golden State Warriors. And from my perspective, what this team is desperately going to need to do is trade Andrew Wiggins. You have to. I don't see. I was colossally disappointed that they didn't make a move at the trade deadline. But for what he brings you, given the money he makes and the inconsistency, it is not worth it when you have better players on your roster. Steve Kerr alluded in an interview the other day that a huge reason why Moses Moody did not get more minutes, the reason why Moses Moody was inconsistent in terms of his playing minutes and just availability in general, was because of how Kerr views Moody. He views Moody in terms of positions in the same boat as Kuminga, as Wiggins, as Klay, as Gary Payton II. You need to reduce that logjam because Moody needs to play. Kuminga needs to play. If Klay Thompson does come back, it's going to have to be in a lesser role off the bench. But if he comes back, he's going to play. And there are just not enough minutes to justify playing Andrew Wiggins. And we'll talk about him in a little more in a second here. But here, the bottom line is this. If Wiggins' value is so low that no other team wants him, why are you playing him? I mean, if worst comes to worst, he needs to sit at the end of that damn bench if no one wants him and you can't move him. But if you can move him, in an ideal situation, you move him and get nothing back to reduce that salary cap hit. Then you can trade Chris Paul for someone actually worthy. And now we're talking about a roster next year that can compete, and a roster where you can also offer a mid-level exception and actually get some free agents besides just the vet minimum. So that's where the team stands right now. When we come back, I want to also read a few notes from Logan Murdoch. He wrote an article for The Ringer. Logan used to cover the Warriors for NBC Sports Bay Area, the team's local broadcast partner. And he said some interesting things. I'm going to share that, and then we're going to start playing the sound from these exit interviews, or maybe I'll just save part 2 for exit interviews. But I'll talk about what was reported by Murdoch after we give some love to our other sponsor for today, and that is the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network, FanDuel. And so in part 2, I'm going to talk about who in the FanDuel Sportsbook I like betting on from the Western Conference. But here are the series odds for the Eastern Conference matchups, the first rounds. And there are some enticing, interesting bets you can make if you're in a place where you can legally bet with FanDuel. And again, let me cover the talking points first real fast. It's playoff time in the NHL, in the NBA, baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's $150 whether you win or lose. That's an incredible promo. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. And speaking of a potential automatic win, these are your series lines for the Eastern Conference. In part 2, I'll cover the West. The Knicks and the 76ers. That's going to be a hell of a series. It's practically even odds for these two teams. The Knicks are favored to win the series -115. The 76ers are favored to win the series -105. And let me actually share my screen here. So for you folks on YouTube, you can actually see these odds from the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. And I strongly believe that the Knicks are going to win this series. I don't think Joel Embiid's knee is strong enough to handle the rigor of a series like this. And I just don't think the 76ers are deep enough. This is not a series I would feel great about betting on, but I love this Knicks team. I love Jalen Brunson. I would bet strongly on the New York Knicks. The Pacers and the Bucks. This is a fascinating one for the second year in a row. Giannis Antetokounmpo not available for the start of this series because of injury, much to the detriment of the Milwaukee Bucks. And as a result of that, the Indiana Pacers are favored to win this series. -132 for the Pacers, +106 for the Bucks. Now, here's the thing, right? When we're talking about this crazy offseason, if the Bucks lose this series, Warriors fans root for this, because here is the sneaky wild card potential fantasy, yet I'm praying for this type of scenario. If the Bucks lose, there is a strong possibility that organization will implode and everyone's going to start running for the hills in terms of personnel. Dame Lillard might want out. It will also reveal that Chris Middleton is no longer the player he once was. They're a thin team. They're not deep. And there is a strong possibility that Giannis Antetokounmpo will want out. Giannis loves Steph. The feeling is mutual. There is a small possibility that if the Bucks lose this series, the Warriors can make a move and make a run for Giannis Antetokounmpo. I am not just pulling that out of my booty. That is a real possibility because multiple sources have said that there is no guarantee that Giannis wants to be a Buck for life. And the Warriors have the pieces to make a deal for Giannis with all those young pieces they have there. Kerr would continue being happy with an old veteran group, but it's an old veteran group with Giannis Antetokounmpo alongside Dre, alongside Steph, alongside Klay, and alongside whoever else you can keep on that roster without decimating it in a trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo. I digress. But in that series, I'm going to hope for the Pacers just for this wild scenario. And I do think the Pacers will win that series. The last one, and this one, I absolutely love the numbers for the Magic. They're plus 164. The Cavaliers are minus 205. This could be Donovan Mitchell's final playoff series playing for the Cleveland Cavaliers. They have not been playing good basketball lately. The Orlando Magic are an up-and-coming team. I love Paolo Banchero. And for plus 164, that's what I'm betting on. And the Celtics don't have a line yet because we don't know yet who they're going to be playing. But stay tuned for that. And those are my feelings and thoughts pertaining to those Eastern Conference series. I hope you win. Hope I help. And I kind of hope that the Bucks lose because I'm going to fantasize about Giannis Antetokounmpo wearing a Warriors jersey next year. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
You are Locked On Warriors, your daily Golden State Warriors podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Warriors your first listen every day for the everydayers. Stay tuned for part 2. We're playing sound from exit interviews. That will be exclusively in part 2. As we wrap up part 1, I want to mention Logan Murdoch of The Ringer, reporting a few days ago in a story he wrote for The Ringer. Quote, leak sources believe Andrew Wiggins will be included in trade talks this summer as the Warriors look to improve their roster. During training camp, here, this is a separate quote now. Quote, during training camp, coaches privately expressed disappointment in his conditioning, which was compounded by a dismal start to the season. I feel like I came into camp all right, Wiggins said in February when asked about a slow start. I feel like I wasn't out of shape or nothing like that. I just feel like once the game started, just finding my rhythm, for some reason, it wasn't there, but doo-doo happens, unquote. He didn't say doo-doo. He said a worse word than that, but we are a family-friendly program here. And the last thing from Logan Murdoch's story that I happen to pull out, quote, several competent wings could be available via trade, including Portland's Jeremy Grant, who I think would be awesome for the Warriors, Toronto's Bruce Brown, who I think would be awesome for the Warriors, and Washington's Kyle Kuzma, who I also think, I don't know if awesome's the right word for him, but it would be a great addition, certainly an upgrade over Wiggins. Golden State's front office has also long kept an eye on Karl Anthony Towns, who, depending on Minnesota's playoff fortunes and projected luxury tax bill, could be available this summer, unquote. We talked about Karl Anthony Towns last offseason. I thought he would be an ideal player for the Warriors to pursue. Never happened. Who knows if he even was available? But if the Timberwolves, and in part 2, I'm going to talk about their odds during the FanDuel ad read. If the Timberwolves lose, let's say in the first round to the Phoenix Suns, they're going to want to shake things up as well. Karl Anthony Towns to the Warriors, I wouldn't hate it. I wouldn't want to give up the farm like I would for Giannis, but I wouldn't hate it either. You're getting it big. You're getting space because the dude can hit threes. I would not hate that move. So there is part 1. In just a moment, we're going to I'm going to play some sound from a lot of players and read you some stats on how they did this season. I want to mention one more time. If you want to sponsor this show, email warriors24pod@gmail.com. We'd love to have you. Your money will be well spent. You'll definitely get rewards for your sponsorship. Stay tuned for part 2 of Locked On Warriors coming up next. Bye-bye.